On a heavy, snow-laden morning in the heart of the Middle Ages, when the pale winter sun struggled to rise above the horizon and the frost clung stubbornly to every stone and timber, the medieval world moved with a slowness shaped by the deep cold that settled into both land and bone, and the villagers, wrapped tightly in rough-spun wool, stepped carefully across the frozen earth, their breath drifting upward in silvery clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they formed. Overnight, a thick blanket of snow had transformed the countryside into a silent, shimmering expanse where fields, once brown and barren, now lay hidden beneath waves of white, and the narrow footpaths connecting cottages had blurred into soft, indistinct lines that required careful navigation. The wooden houses, huddled together for warmth like a small congregation of weary travelers, groaned gently beneath the weight of snow piling upon their roofs, and the smoke rising from their chimneys curled lazily into the still morning air, carrying with it the comforting scent of burning oak and peat. Inside these homes, hearth fires crackled softly, casting flickering amber light across rough tables, iron pots, and sleeping animals dozing in warm corners, and families lingered longer than usual near the flames, grateful for even the smallest pocket of warmth during the bitter season. Outside, the village well had frozen over during the night, requiring men to break through the icy shell with the careful swing of an axe, while horses and oxen huddled close in their stalls, their warm breath rising in delicate wisps that quickly disappeared into the frigid air. The world was quieter now, so quiet that even the distant forest, normally alive with birds and rustling branches, stood utterly still, its tall pines and bare oaks draped in snow so heavy that their limbs bowed in solemn silence. The only sounds were the soft crunch of footsteps, the occasional bleat of a hungry goat, and the low murmur of voices carried gently through the stillness, as though the cold itself demanded a certain reverence. Children peered out from behind fur-lined curtains, their cheeks flushed from the heat of the hearth as they watched snowflakes drift in slow, deliberate spirals, each one a tiny, unique miracle glowing faintly beneath the muted winter light. And though life was harder in winter, food scarcer, travel dangerous, and illness ever-threatening, there was an undeniable beauty to the hush that settled over the landscape, a deep, almost spiritual calm that made the harsh medieval world feel, for just a moment, peaceful, suspended between earth and sky in a quiet white dream. Villagers moved through the day wrapped in layers of wool and silence, each breath a soft reminder of the season's grip, yet beneath the cold their hearts held a quiet resilience, the ancient, enduring strength of people who had weathered countless winters and would weather countless more. And as the snow continued to fall in gentle, unhurried flurries, the medieval village existed as if outside time itself, a tiny, flickering island of life in the vast, frozen stillness of the season. As the medieval village settled deeper into the frozen morning, the snow continuing its unhurried descent from a sky the color of pale slate, the people moved slowly through their routines, knowing that winter demanded not haste but patience, a careful respect for the cold that shaped every hour of their day. And even as the sun climbed higher, though still weakly, its rays dulled by the thick winter air, the chill remained so sharp that it seemed to seep into the very bones of the cottages, into the wooden beams, the stone hearths, the rough-woven garments hanging near the fire, and even into the weary hearts of those who had long endured the season's weight. The narrow lanes between the houses, now little more than winding trenches carved through deep snow, echoed faintly with the muffled sounds of labor, the slow, rhythmic chopping of firewood, the crackle of kindling catching flame, the soft murmur of villagers exchanging greetings wrapped in clouds of frosted breath. Women stepped carefully along these paths, their heavy skirts brushing against snowbanks as they carried baskets filled with dried herbs, roots, and the last remaining vegetables of autumn's harvest, their fingers numb despite the thick woolen mittens they wore, and they moved with a quiet determination, aware that every task, no matter how small, took twice as long in the cold. In the village square, the wooden well creaked under layers of ice, its ropes stiff and brittle, and the men who had been chosen to retrieve water worked with slow, deliberate movements, hacking away the frozen crust to reach the liquid below, pulling up buckets so cold that frost formed instantly along their iron rims. Animals, too, moved cautiously through the day, sheep huddling together for warmth in a sheltered pen, chickens standing atop one another inside the coop to escape the icy ground, dogs circling near doorsteps, noses buried in their fur as they searched for pockets of warmth. Beyond the village, the forest loomed with an ancient silent presence, its tall pines and twisted oaks cloaked in thick white blankets that muted even the smallest rustle of movement, and those who dared to enter the woods did so with deep caution, aware that predators, wolves driven closer by hunger, foxes searching for easy prey, moved almost invisibly through the snow, their prints vanishing beneath fresh flakes before they could be followed. Yet despite the dangers, some villagers still ventured into the forest to gather fallen branches or inspect traps, their boots sinking into the soft powdery drifts with each step, their breath rising in faint trails that disappeared into the vast, frozen canopy above them. The cold shaped every thought and action, prompting constant awareness of the body. Hands that stiffened too quickly, feet that numbed with alarming speed, noses and ears that burned before settling into a dull ache, and even indoors, near the warming glow of the hearth, the chill clung stubbornly to the air, making every movement slow, careful, deliberate. Children remained inside for most of the day, gathered near the fire as their mothers told stories. Old tales passed down through generations of winters just like this one. Stories of spirits said to wander the snowy woods, of travelers who found shelter with mysterious forest guardians, of ancient kings whose breath could freeze rivers solid. These tales, spoken softly over the crackling fire, lulled the younger children into drowsy half-sleep, their small faces illuminated by the warm flicker of flame, while older children listened with wide-eyed fascination, glancing occasionally toward the window where snow continued its quiet descent. The fire, though small, became the heart of each home, a sanctuary against the cold's relentless presence, and every family tended it with reverence, feeding it carefully chosen logs and dried twigs, shielding it from drafts that might snuff out its fragile life. As midday approached, though the sun remained pale and distant, a subtle shift passed through the village. A softening of shadows, a faint shimmer across the untouched snow, a warmth not felt by the skin but sensed somewhere deeper, as if the world's frozen heartbeat had slowed just enough to offer a gentle respite. And in that fragile moment, the medieval village breathed out a long, collective sigh, finding within the harshness of winter a fleeting peace, a reminder that even in the coldest season, beauty and calm could still weave themselves quietly into the fabric of daily life. As the winter day stretched slowly onward, the medieval village moved through the hours with the steady, unhurried rhythm of people who understood that nothing, neither hunger nor hope, neither hardship nor comfort, could ever be rushed in the depths of a long snowbound season, and as the pale sun drifted across the sky, its muted light cast soft, elongated shadows over the snow-covered rooftops, turning each cottage into a quiet monument of endurance standing against the cold. Farmers who once spent their days in the fields now found their tasks confined to whatever small work could be done within the boundaries of their frost-laden home, repairing broken tools near the warmth of the hearth, mending torn garments with thick thread and sore fingers, carving wooden spoons or bowls with slow, meditative strokes, each movement echoing the ancient patience of those who had endured countless winters before them. Outside, the village pathways remained half-buried, requiring each traveler to lift their feet high with every step, the snow clinging to their boots in heavy clumps that added weight to an already difficult journey. And yet the villagers pressed on, wrapped in layers of coarse wool and animal hides that shielded them from the biting wind. The blacksmith's forge, once a roaring center of heat and noise, now produced only a faint rhythmic tapping as he worked sparingly through the cold, the iron cooling too quickly, the bellows stiff from frost. But even so he persisted, repairing hinges or shaping small tools that could not wait for spring. Meanwhile, the village healer moved from home to home, her basket filled with dried herbs, salves, and poultices preserved from the last warm season. Her footsteps careful on the icy paths as she checked on the elderly, the weak, or the young whose breath rattled with winter illness, and her calm presence brought comfort to families who feared the cold not only for its merciless bite but for the unseen sickness it often carried. In the barns, lanterns flickered faintly as farmers tended their animals, spreading fresh straw to keep the cattle warm, breaking ice from water troughs, whispering gently to restless horses whose breath rose in thick, swirling clouds, and the low, steady sounds of animal life. Soft snorts, shifting hooves, the quiet munching of hay, added a sense of warmth to the frozen world outside. Along the village edge, the forest stood in solemn silence, its trees coated in thick layers of snow that glittered under the weak sunlight, and within its shadowed depths the air was so still that even the faintest imprint of a hare or fox seemed impossibly loud against the vast, untouched white. Yet those brave enough to venture into the woods for firewood or game moved with heightened senses, aware that wolves prowled nearer during harsh winters, their hunger sharpening with each passing day. Their howls piercing the otherwise quiet nights like distant, mournful songs carried by the wind. Children who could not resist the allure of the snow slipped outside for brief bursts of play, tossing handfuls of powder into the air, leaving small trails of footprints before their mothers called them back inside to warm their reddened hands by the crackling fire, and their laughter, though fleeting, brought a rare spark of joy to the frozen village. As the afternoon deepened, the sky took on a soft pearly glow, the light diffusing through the thick winter clouds in a way that seemed to erase the boundaries between earth and heavens, and for a moment the entire world appeared suspended in a quiet dream, every sound softened, every movement slowed, as though time itself chose to drift gently rather than march forward with its usual insistence. Inside the cottages, families gathered around their hearths once more, stirring simple stews made from dried beans, onions, and the last of the preserved meat, the aroma rising slowly into the warm air as the flames cast dancing shadows along the timbered walls. Conversation remained low and steady, filled with stories of winters past, tales of ancestors who had faced even harsher seasons, and quiet hopes that the return of spring, though still distant, would bring renewed life to the fields and forests. Outside, as the light began to fade, the snow started to fall again in delicate drifting flakes, each one settling gently upon the already thick blanket below, and the village slipped gradually into the embrace of evening, its cottages glowing faintly from within like small warm lanterns scattered across the frozen world. The cold deepened, pressing against doors and window shutters, reminding every soul that warmth was precious, fragile, and worth guarding fiercely. And as night drew nearer and the first stars struggled to pierce the winter sky, the medieval village, tired yet enduring, prepared to face another long, quiet evening in a season that tested the resilience of every living thing beneath its vast, snowy silence. As evening settled gently over the snowy medieval village, the sky deepened into a velvety blue that seemed to swallow the last traces of daylight, and the falling snow thickened into a soft, steady drift, each flake descending with the unhurried grace of a world at rest, coating rooftops, fences, and footpaths in a fresh layer of white that glowed faintly beneath the rising moon. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying with it the quiet crackle of frost forming along wooden beams and the faint groans of old trees adjusting to the weight of ice upon their branches, and inside each cottage the hearth fire became not merely a source of warmth but the beating heart of the home, its glow illuminating faces softened by fatigue and its heat offering a fragile barrier against the vast chill pressing in from the outside world. Families drew closer to the flames as the night deepened, wrapping themselves in wool blankets patched many times over, sipping warm broth from wooden bowls, and sharing stories that had been passed from one winter to the next for generations. Tales of distant lands, of heroic ancestors, of strange lights seen over the mountains in years long past, and of spirits said to wander the snow-covered forests when the moon hung heavy in the sky. These stories, spoken in low voices so as not to disturb the gentle stillness of the night, wove a comforting spell around the listeners, helping them forget, if only for a moment, the harshness of the season and the worry of dwindling stores. Outside, the wind stirred gently, brushing powdered snow from the treetops and carrying with it distant echoes, the soft hoot of an owl seeking prey, the faint rustle of a hare bounding through the drifts, and farther still, the lonely drawn-out howl of a wolf whose voice trembled through the dark like a thread connecting the land's wild, hungry heart to the quiet serenity of the village. Though the villagers feared wolves, they also respected them, for in the depth of winter both man and beast struggled simply to survive, and the sound of a wolf's cry, though chilling, reminded them that life persisted even in the coldest corners of the world. In one cottage at the village's edge, a solitary elderly man sat near the fire, his gnarled hands slowly carving a piece of wood into the shape of a small bird. His eyes half closed as memories drifted through his mind like snowflakes blown across a frozen field. He remembered winters from his youth, some harsher, some kinder, and he could still recall the feeling of running through deep snow with the boundless energy of a child, the warmth of his mother's hands guiding him back inside, and the way the entire village would gather together during the darkest nights to share food, music, and stories until the cold no longer felt quite so heavy. Now, though the years had taken their toll on his body, he found solace in the rhythmic motion of carving and in the steady crackle of the fire beside him, knowing that despite all the hardships winter brought, it also carried moments of deep, quiet beauty, Moments like this, when the world felt hushed and luminous, wrapped in the soft glow of firelight and snow. Across the village, in a barn lit by a single lantern, a young farmhand tended to the animals, brushing frost from the backs of sheep and murmuring soothing words to the oxen whose large eyes blinked slowly in the dim warmth. He too felt the weight of winter, but he sensed a kind of calm settling over the land, a stillness that allowed him to breathe more deeply, to move more gently, to notice the small miracles of warmth and life that persisted despite the cold. And as the night grew darker, the snow continued to fall, layering the world in a deeper silence, a silence so complete it felt as though time itself had slowed, pausing long enough for every soul, human and animal alike, to rest, to reflect, to endure. One by one, the lanterns in the village were extinguished, their faint glow replaced by the silver-blue shimmer of moonlight reflecting off endless snow, and the cottages seemed to sink deeper into the soft white earth, as if the village were being slowly tucked into a blanket of winter. Inside, the last whispers faded. Children drifted into dreams warmed by the fire, and adults closed their eyes with quiet prayers for another morning's safety. And outside, beneath the cold stars that glimmered faintly overhead, the medieval village entered a deep, peaceful stillness. A stillness shaped not by comfort but by resilience, not by ease but by the quiet strength of those who had learned to live in harmony with the long, frozen nights of winter. As the frozen night deepened and settled even more heavily over the medieval village, the snow continued its gentle descent in endless, whispering flakes that wrapped the world in a cocoon of white silence, and the moon, drifting behind a veil of thin clouds, cast a diffuse silver glow that made every rooftop, every tree, every fence post shimmer as though dusted with ground pearls, giving the familiar landscape a dreamlike, almost otherworldly quality that blurred the line between reality and legend. Inside the cottages, fires burned low but steady, sending thin ribbons of smoke curling upward through chimneys where frost clung like lace, and these plumes rose into the still night air, merging with the dark sky until they disappeared entirely, leaving no trace of the small warm lives gathered below. The villagers, now mostly asleep, breathed slowly and deeply beneath layers of wool and fur, their dreams a mixture of the day's toil and the old winter tales whispered around the hearth. Stories of spirits who walked the snowy fields, of mysterious figures glimpsed at the edge of the forest, of blessings and curses delivered by unseen forces when the world lay frozen and hushed. In one home, a mother remained awake long after her children had fallen into slumber, her tired eyes watching the fire as it crackled softly, casting warm light across the wooden beams overhead. She held a small piece of knitting in her hands, though her fingers had grown too stiff with cold and exhaustion to continue, and instead she simply sat, listening to the slow breathing of her family and feeling the deep, quiet gratitude that came from surviving another winter's day. Across the village, a shepherd dozed lightly in a chair by the door of his modest cottage, a woolen cloak draped over his shoulders, his boots still damp from the snow. He had spent the final hours before nightfall ensuring his flock was warm, fed, and safe from predators, and though his body ached from the cold, he allowed himself a small moment of contentment knowing that his animals slept peacefully. Meanwhile, on the edge of the forest where the village met the wilderness, the snow-covered trees stood tall and silent, their branches so heavy with ice that they bent toward the ground in graceful arcs, forming natural arches that framed the forest path. And along this path, unseen by the slumbering villagers, a lone fox picked its way across the drifts, its orange fur muted beneath the moonlight, its delicate paws leaving a faint trail that the falling snow quickly erased. Deeper in the woods, a small stream continued to flow beneath a thin sheet of ice, its faint, muffled gurgle adding a hidden music to the winter night, a reminder that even in the coldest season, life persisted in quiet, unseen ways. Every so often, a gust of wind brushed through the trees, sending a soft cascade of snow drifting to the ground, the sound so light and ethereal that it was almost indistinguishable from the night's own breath. The wolves, whose distant howls earlier had echoed through the valley, now moved silently beneath the trees, their sleek bodies weaving through the shadows as they searched for prey. They paused occasionally to sniff the air or tilt their heads toward the village lights far in the distance, but they kept to the forest's edge, wary of venturing too close to human settlements. In the village square, the frozen well gleamed faintly under the moonlight, its thick rim coated in frost, its rope stiff and unmoving, and the wooden bucket that hung from its hook shifted slightly whenever the wind whispered across the snow. Nearby, the market stalls, long since abandoned until spring, stood like silent sentinels beneath the drifts, their empty surfaces dusted with snow, their roofs sagging gently under winter's weight. A lone lantern outside the blacksmith's forge flickered weakly, its flame almost extinguished, casting faint, broken shadows across the anvil and tools inside. Even the iron seemed to sleep in winter, resting until the return of warmth revived the forge's familiar roar. As the hours slipped by, the village's stillness deepened further, a profound and peaceful quiet that wrapped itself around every building, every path, every soul, as though winter itself were standing guard over the sleeping community. The snow fell more slowly now, drifting in delicate spirals that sparkled softly whenever the moonlight escaped the clouds, and the village seemed to exhale into the night, surrendering fully to the vast, serene quiet of winter. And in this deep stillness, where time felt suspended and the boundary between the mortal world and the ancient unseen world grew thin, the medieval village lay cocooned in peace, fragile yet enduring, vulnerable yet resilient, resting beneath the soft, eternal hush of a snowy winter night. As the night stretched deeper into its frozen silence, the medieval village seemed to sink further into the soft, pale embrace of winter, the snow falling in ever gentler flakes that drifted downward like tiny feathers shaken loose from the wings of some great, unseen creature circling high above the clouds, and the moon, now lower in the sky, cast a muted, silvery glow that softened every shape and blurred every edge until the entire world appeared as though wrapped in a delicate veil of frost-kissed lace. The rooftops of the cottages sagged under the new snow, creating smooth, rounded shapes that glimmered faintly in the moonlight, while the chimneys, dark against the glowing rooftops, puffed only the faintest wisps of smoke, their fires now burning low beneath beds of glowing embers tended earlier in the evening by tired hands. Inside the houses, most families had fallen into deep sleep, their soft breathing blending with the gentle crackle of dying hearth fires, and within these warm, flickering sanctuaries, dreams wove themselves through the minds of the sleeping villagers. Dreams shaped by old legends, daily struggles, long-forgotten memories, and the quiet, ever-present murmur of winter's lullaby outside. In one cottage near the village's edge, a young woman lay awake long after the others had drifted into slumber, her eyes following the slow dance of shadows on the ceiling as the fire shifted and settled in the hearth. She pulled her wool blanket tighter around her shoulders and listened to the world outside. Hearing only the soft hiss of snow landing upon snow, the faint creak of timber expanding in the cold, and the occasional, distant rumble of ice cracking somewhere deep within the frozen river. The solitude was comforting rather than unsettling, for she had always found peace in winter's quiet, feeling as though the season's stillness allowed her thoughts to settle like flakes in a snow globe, each idea drifting gently until it found its proper place. She thought of spring, of course, of thawing earth, new shoots breaking through the softened soil, and the laughter that returned to the village when the first warm breezes arrived. But she also cherished these quiet winter nights when time seemed to slow, offering small, precious moments of reflection before the inevitable rush of the busy seasons ahead. Not far from her cottage, a thin plume of smoke rose from a small workshop where an elderly craftsman, well past the age when most men ceased hard labor, sat hunched over his workbench, unwilling to let sleep claim him before he finished carving a small wooden charm he had promised to a neighboring child. His knotted fingers moved slowly, shaped by decades of wear and frost, but the delicate figure of a tiny deer was taking form beneath his blade, its legs slender, its posture gentle, as though poised to leap into the snowy forest at any moment. A single lantern flickered beside him, its warm glow reflecting softly off the polished grain of half-finished carvings stacked neatly around the room, and though exhaustion pulled at his eyelids, he continued to work, not out of obligation but because creating beauty, however small, helped him endure the long winter hours. When he finally put down his knife and brushed wood shavings from his lap, he gazed at the finished carving with a satisfied nod, imagining the child's smile upon receiving it. And in that simple image he felt the quiet warmth of purpose settle within him, a warmth that rivaled even the fire crackling softly in the corner. Across the village square, the watchman stationed at the small wooden tower stamped his feet against the cold, trying to maintain feeling in his toes as he scanned the village boundaries for any unusual movement. His breath, rising in thick clouds, disappeared quickly into the night air, and he wrapped his cloak more tightly around himself, pulling the hood low to shield his face from the biting wind. His task was lonely, but he did not resent it. On the contrary, he viewed these night watches as moments of quiet stewardship, a chance to protect the sleeping villagers from dangers both real and imagined. He watched the forest edge carefully, knowing that wolves sometimes prowled closer on nights like this, but the wilderness remained still, its shadows untouched, its silence profound. He listened instead to the muffled sound of the river cracking under the weight of new ice, a deep and resonant groan that rolled across the snowfields like the voice of the earth itself adjusting to winter's grip. Above him, the stars shimmered faintly, blurred by drifting clouds but still visible enough to guide travelers should any have lost their way in the snow, though he doubted any soul would willingly brave the frozen roads at such an hour. Deeper into the night, the snowfall slowed further, the flakes becoming smaller, lighter, almost hesitant, as though winter itself were growing weary. The moon slipped behind a cloud bank, dimming the world until the only light came from the village's remaining embers and the faint glow of starlight reflected on the snow. Even the wolves had quieted now, their distant calls fading into the hush of the sleeping landscape. And in this profound stillness, where not even the wind dared disturb the delicate beauty of the frozen night, the medieval village seemed to drift into a deeper layer of silence. A silence so complete it felt almost sacred, as though the land, the people, and the winter night shared a single slow heartbeat. The hours that followed were timeless, stretching on in soft, unbroken quiet, and the world remained suspended in winter's tender, unyielding embrace. Until at last, in the farthest corner of the horizon, a faint thread of pale light began to appear, fragile but determined, marking the first breath of another cold winter dawn. As the faint thread of dawn slowly widened along the distant horizon, spreading a pale wash of silver-blue light over the snowbound landscape, the medieval village began to stir from the depths of its winter slumber, though the transition from night to day was so gentle, so gradual, that for a long moment the world seemed caught between dreaming and waking, held softly in the fragile hush that only a frozen morning could create. The snow, having fallen all through the night, now lay in deep, undisturbed layers over every rooftop, every fence post, every narrow lane that wound through the clustered cottages, and as the sky brightened, the surface of this vast white blanket shimmered faintly, reflecting the newborn light like a kingdom carved from powdered crystal. The air was bitterly cold, so cold that even the slightest breath rose in long, trembling plumes, and the frost along the windows of the cottages had grown thicker overnight, forming intricate patterns that looked like delicate forest branches or the wings of icy winter spirits etched upon the glass. Inside these cottages, the first signs of waking life were subtle. A soft shifting beneath heavy wool blankets, a muffled cough, the creak of an old wooden bed frame adjusting to the movement of its occupant. A few moments later, someone stirred the embers in a hearth, and the faint crackle of rekindled flame sliced through the silence like the softest whisper. The glow of firelight grew slowly, illuminating the interiors with warm, amber tones that pushed back the pale morning chill, turning rough-hewn tables and earthenware pots into shapes that felt familiar, comforting, alive. In one cottage, a mother gently wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders before kneeling beside the hearth to coax the fire into strength, blowing softly into the embers until they flared into renewed heat and sent faint sparks floating upward into the air. As the flames grew brighter, she placed an iron pot over them, filling it with snow that would soon melt into water for the morning meal, a necessary ritual during the long winter months when wells froze and rivers turned to sheets of ice. In another home, a father rose slowly from his bed, rubbing warmth into his stiff fingers as he stepped toward the window, brushing away frost with the back of his hand to peer outside. The sight of the untouched snow brought both a smile and a sigh to his face, for though its beauty was undeniable, he knew well the labor it demanded, shoveling paths, feeding animals, gathering what little firewood remained dry enough to burn. Yet he also felt a deep, unspoken reassurance in the quiet of the morning, in the certainty that winter, though harsh, was a season they had endured since time immemorial, a season woven into the very rhythm of their lives. Outside, the village dogs were the first to break the stillness. One stretched slowly from its bed of straw, shaking snowflakes from its fur as it stepped out into the cold. Another, curled near a stable door, raised its head and sniffed the air, sensing the subtle shift in light that signaled the coming of dawn. Their soft movements stirred the animals inside the barns. Cows exhaled long, misty breaths, their flanks rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. Horses shifted their hooves, stamping lightly against the frozen ground. Chickens clucked drowsily, huddled together for warmth beneath layers of straw. A lantern flickered to life in the barn as a young farmhand arrived. His boots crunching through deep snow. His cheeks reddened by the cold as he checked on each animal with a careful, practiced hand. He spoke to them in low, soothing tones, his words forming small clouds in the frosty air, and though they could not understand him, the animals responded with calm familiarity, as though the gentle cadence of his voice alone carried reassurance. Along the edge of the forest, the trees stood silent and tall, their branches bending beneath the weight of fresh snow, but beneath this stillness, the woods were beginning to wake as well. A lone stag stepped cautiously into a clearing, its breath steaming softly as it tested the air for danger. A fox trotted lightly across the drifts, its fur glowing faintly in the morning light. And high above, unseen birds shifted within their nests, ruffling their feathers as they prepared to begin the day's quiet survival. Deep within the forest, the river groaned beneath its icy covering, the slow shifting of frozen layers creating low, resonant cracks that echoed faintly through the trees like distant drumbeats, winter's own music reverberating through the land. Back in the village, as more fires flickered to life within the cottages, the scent of smoke mingled with the cold morning air, rising gently above the rooftops in thin, wavering trails. One by one, the villagers stepped outside, bundled tightly against the cold, their breath forming pale clouds before them as they began the necessary tasks of the day. Men shoveled narrow pathways through the thick drifts, their tools striking the dense, compacted snow with rhythmic thuds. Women carried small baskets to gather more snow for melting, their boots sinking deeply with each careful step. Children, still sleepy but wide-eyed with wonder, pressed their mittens into the fresh snow, leaving small prints that trailed behind them like the tracks of winter sprites exploring their frozen kingdom. Even in the coldest season, life continued with a quiet persistence, each villager contributing in their own small way to the fragile balance that kept the community alive. And in these moments, when the sun finally broke through the cloud bank, casting its first true beams across the snowy fields, igniting the village in soft golden light, the world seemed to shimmer with a deep, peaceful beauty, a reminder that even the harshest winters carried within them moments of serenity, reflection, and quiet endurance. The day was just beginning, but already the medieval village felt nestled securely within its wintry cradle, ready to face whatever the long, cold hours ahead might bring. As the pale morning light continued to spread across the snow-covered medieval village, softening the edges of rooftops and turning every frost-tipped branch into a shimmering sculpture, the day unfolded with the same gentle slowness that winter demanded, each moment stretching quietly into the next as though the cold itself softened the passage of time. The villagers, now fully awake, moved through the crisp morning air with a kind of weary determination, their breath rising in steady plumes that drifted upward before dissolving into the pale sky. They knew that though the world appeared peaceful, wrapped in silence, coated in beauty, winter never allowed complacency, and every chore, no matter how routine, carried with it the weight of necessity. A group of men gathered near the well, their boots sinking into the powdery drifts as they worked together to break through the fresh layer of ice that had formed overnight. The rhythmic chop of iron against frozen water echoed across the still morning, sharp and deliberate, until at last the thick surface gave way with a resonant crack that sent small ripples of sound through the quiet air. They lowered the bucket slowly, listening to the faint splash far below, and when it rose again brimming with ice-cold water, they passed it from one to another with careful, practiced movements, aware of how precious even the simplest resources became in winter's grasp. Nearby, an elderly woman emerged from her cottage, her figure wrapped in layered wool garments dyed in the muted tones of the season. Deep browns, earthy greens, soft grays that blended seamlessly with the winter landscape. She carried a small basket filled with dried herbs and roots, stepping gingerly along the path as she made her way to a neighboring home where a young mother awaited her. The healer's visits grew more frequent in winter, when fevers rose easily and lungs weakened in the bitter cold. And though her supplies were limited, her knowledge was deep, shaped by years spent studying plants, seasons, and the quiet wisdom of those who came before her. As she entered the cottage, the warm air greeted her like a soft embrace, and she moved with gentle authority, preparing poultices and warm infusions made from remnants of last summer's harvest, reminders that no season, not even winter, existed in isolation. In the barns, the farmhands continued their morning rounds, brushing frost from thick animal coats and spreading fresh hay across the floors. A young stable boy paused for a moment to run his hand along the neck of a mare, her breath warm against his chilled skin, and he murmured softly to her as she nuzzled his arm in return. Despite the biting cold outside, the stalls were filled with a kind of living warmth, a mix of animal breath, straw, and the faint glow of lanterns, that made the barn feel like a sanctuary against the season's sternness. Outside its wooden walls, the wind stirred softly, carrying with it the distant scent of pine and the faint rustle of snow sliding from tree branches. Along the edge of the village, the blacksmith finally stepped out of his forge to gather more firewood. The door creaked open to reveal a man whose face was lined with soot and years of labor, yet whose eyes held a quiet resilience born of countless winters survived. He paused briefly at the threshold, allowing the crisp morning air to clear his lungs of the heat and smoke lingering inside, and he studied the landscape with the practiced eye of someone who knew intimately how the world changed with each shift of the season. The snow muffled every sound except for the faint thud of his boots as he crossed toward a stack of logs half buried beneath the white drifts. Even in winter, his work never ceased. Tools broke, hinges snapped, blades dulled, and the village relied on him just as much on the coldest days as they did in summer's full warmth. Children, wrapped in woolen cloaks and thick mittens, ventured out into the snow once more, their cheeks bright with cold and their laughter rising sweetly into the still morning air. Though their chores awaited them, feeding chickens, carrying small bundles of wood, sweeping the snow from cottage doors, the magic of the snowy world called to them first. They traced intricate shapes in the snow with sticks, built small snow forts near the fences, and pressed their footprints into the powdery surface, leaving behind trails that wound through the village like playful ribbons of life. Their joy brought a quiet warmth to the hearts of the adults, who watched from windows or paused in their tasks to smile, reminded that even in winter's harshest moments, childhood found a way to kindle light. Beyond the village, the vast expanse of forest began to awaken as well, though its stirring remained subtle, almost reverent. A pair of deer stepped cautiously through the snow, their hooves barely disturbing the pristine surface as they searched for patches of bark or winterberries. Farther still, a raven took flight from the frosted branches of a towering pine, its black wings slicing through the cold air with a soft whoosh that carried across the silent landscape. The forest in winter was a world unto itself, mysterious, quiet, and immense, and though the villagers respected it deeply, few dared to venture far into its depths during the harshest months. As the morning matured, sunlight filtered tentatively through the thick winter clouds, casting long, pale rays across the snowfields and transforming the frozen world into a shimmering sea of silver and white. The villagers paused in their tasks to admire the sight, their eyes reflecting the brilliance of the landscape, and in that moment of stillness, they felt the peculiar beauty of winter settle warmly within them, a beauty not born of comfort or ease, but of endurance, reflection, and the quiet strength that came from living in harmony with the cold. And though the day promised more challenges, more paths to clear, more fires to tend, more provisions to ration, the medieval village moved forward with calm determination, sheltered beneath a winter sky that stretched endlessly above them, ancient and serene, as the cycle of the cold season continued to unfold in slow, quiet majesty. As the winter day continued its slow and measured unfolding, the medieval village seemed to breathe in quiet unison with the frozen world around it, every movement softened by the thick snow, every sound muted into a gentle murmur that drifted almost dreamlike through the crisp, icy air. The sunlight, muted though it was, created a faint shimmer across the snowbanks, casting pale golden reflections upon the village walls and turning the frost that clung to wooden beams into delicate, sparkling patterns that looked almost as if the buildings had been adorned with threads of silver. As the hours crept forward, the villagers settled deeper into their daily rhythm, each person performing the tasks winter demanded with a patience born of generations who had learned to live within the season's quiet, unyielding grasp. A group of older men gathered near the communal woodpile, their breath rising in white puffs as they swung axes into thick logs with steady determination, splitting the wood into pieces small enough to carry indoors. Each strike echoed faintly across the snow-covered ground, merging with the soft thump of logs falling into waiting baskets. Their hands were rough and reddened by the cold, but their movements were practiced, almost rhythmic, shaped by countless winters spent feeding the unending hunger of hearth fires. Nearby, a young woman walked carefully along a narrow path, balancing a wooden bucket of water drawn earlier from the well. The weight of it pulled at her arms, but she moved with a quiet grace, her boots leaving firm impressions in the snow that would later drift over and fill as the wind picked up again toward evening. She paused once to adjust her shawl, lifting her gaze to watch a cloud of ravens circling above the forest's edge. An omen to some, a simple winter sight to others, before continuing on her way. At the far end of the village, two brothers worked together to clear a small roof of the snow that had piled dangerously thick overnight. One stood on the ground, passing up a wooden shovel, while the other braced himself carefully on the sloping surface, pushing the snow downward in long, smooth waves that fell with a muffled thud into the drifts below. Their laughter, soft and warm despite the cold, floated through the air as they teased each other about slipping or missing a patch, and though the task was tiring, there was comfort in sharing the work, in knowing that each gesture contributed to the village's survival. Inside the homes, the atmosphere carried a soft glow from the hearths that burned brighter now. Warming pots of stew and drying the damp wool garments hung nearby. The aromas of onions, barley, herbs, and preserved meats slowly filled the rooms, drifting lazily upward to mingle with the faint scent of smoke and the earthy fragrance of the wooden beams overhead. Families gathered around these fires, some mending clothing with heavy thread, others weaving baskets or carving small tools to replace those broken by the cold. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing patterns in the ash scattered beneath the hearth or shaping little figures from bits of soft wax saved from old candles. They chatted quietly, their voices soft as if instinctively respecting winter's hush, while mothers tended the stew or inspected herbs hung from the rafters, reminders of summer's warmth carefully preserved for moments of need. Outside, a gentle wind began to stir, sweeping softly across the fields and sending small flurries of snow drifting through the lanes like tiny spirits dancing above the ground. The air, though still bitterly cold, carried with it the faintest scent of evergreen from the forest, a hint of life beneath winter's stillness. A hunter, returning from the woods, trudged into the village with cautious steps, his cloak dusted with snow and his boots stiff from the cold. Though he carried no game today, the deep snow made hunting difficult. He was greeted with nods of understanding from those who saw him pass, for winter was a season of scarcity, and every attempt, successful or not, was a contribution to the village's fight for endurance. He stopped near the blacksmith's forge to warm his hands over a small outdoor brazier, the metal tools within glowing faintly as the blacksmith tapped them with gentle precision. The two men exchanged quiet words, about tracks spotted near the river, about wolves moving closer, about the thickness of the ice that now coated the world, and their conversation, though low and serious, carried a sense of fellowship forged by shared hardship. As midday approached, the sky dimmed slightly as another thin veil of clouds drifted across the sun, softening the world into shades of pale gray and white. Snow began to fall again, lightly at first, the flakes swirling lazily in the cold air like drifting petals, each one settling gently onto the layers already resting upon the earth. The villagers paused in their tasks to glance upward, watching the snow descend with a quiet, contemplative calm, for in this season, snow was both a burden and a blanket, an obstacle to movement but also a shield against the harsh winds that would otherwise cut mercilessly through the village. The sound of church bells rang faintly through the air then, a slow, melodic chime that drifted across the snow like a distant lullaby, calling the villagers to gather for a brief moment of prayer and warmth. They moved toward the small stone chapel together, their footsteps forming a pattern of deep prints that marked the path through the snow, their cloaks fluttering gently in the breeze. Inside the chapel, candles flickered along the walls, their golden light reflecting off stained glass windows depicting saints, seasons, and long-forgotten winter miracles. The villagers filled the wooden pews in silence, their faces softened by the calm glow of candlelight as the priest stepped forward. His voice warm and steady as he spoke words of reassurance, humility, and hope. He reminded them that winter, though harsh and unforgiving, was part of the cycle that shaped their lives, a test that strengthened the spirit and brought communities together in ways that warmer seasons never demanded. As he spoke, the villagers bowed their heads, letting the words settle into their hearts like embers placed upon a cold hearth, small but steady sources of warmth that they would carry with them through the long hours ahead. When they emerged from the chapel, the snow had thickened again, swirling gently in the winter air, and the world seemed softer, quieter, more dreamlike than before. The villagers dispersed back to their homes and chores, moving once again with the quiet resilience that had sustained their ancestors for centuries. And as the afternoon stretched onward, the medieval village lay peacefully beneath the falling snow, wrapped in the serene, ancient stillness of winter. A stillness that whispered of endurance, unity, and the quiet beauty found in even the coldest of days. As the afternoon deepened into a soft, muted haze, the medieval village remained cradled beneath the thickening veil of snow, its cottages and barns now appearing almost as gentle mounds rising from the white earth, their shapes softened by the uninterrupted fall of delicate flakes that drifted endlessly from the pale winter sky. The air had grown colder still, sharpening into a quiet, crystalline chill that clung to every exposed surface, turning fence posts into frosted sculptures and coating window shutters with a thin, glassy sheen. Even the trees at the forest's edge, tall pines and bare oaks whose branches arched solemnly toward the sky, seemed frozen in place, their silhouettes blurred into faint outlines as the snowfall thickened around them. Within the village, the rhythm of daily work continued, though at a slower, more careful pace, as the weight of the snow made every movement deliberate. The men at the woodpile finished their chopping and carried the split logs indoors, each step a muffled crunch through the rising drifts. They worked in companionable silence, the cold biting at their beards and reddening their cheeks, yet their faces carried the steady resolve of seasoned winter dwellers, men who had weathered dozens of seasons just like this one and knew that each log carried inside it the warmth that would protect their families from the night's deep freeze. Inside the cottages, the fires had grown stronger, their flames flickering brightly against the stone hearths as families prepared their modest midday meals. The stew, now thick with barley and softened root vegetables, simmered gently, sending out warm, fragrant curls of steam that mingled with the comforting scent of burning wood. Mothers ladled the hearty mixture into bowls, calling the children inside from their brief play in the snow. The little ones tumbled in, cheeks flushed and mittens damp, their laughter trailing behind them like falling snowflakes as they clambered eagerly toward the fire, where warmth wrapped around them like an embrace. They gathered at the table, hands cupped around steaming bowls, savoring each spoonful as the wind outside whispered softly against the walls. Meanwhile, the elderly grandmother in one cottage continued her slow weaving at the loom, each gentle press of her foot and guiding motion of her hands contributing to the creation of a sturdy woolen blanket meant to protect someone from the season's cold. She hummed an old winter tune as she worked, her voice low and soothing, a melody passed through generations of women who had navigated the unforgiving winters with patience and quiet endurance. In another home, a father repaired a cracked wooden ladle, sanding its handle smooth before rubbing it with oil that gave the grain a warm, golden sheen. These simple acts, mending, weaving, tending, preparing, knitted the fabric of village life together, each task a thread that kept the community strong through the year's harshest days. Outside, the snow had risen to nearly half the height of the fence posts, piling in drifts shaped by gentle currents of wind that carried with them whispers from the forest. A pair of hunters moved cautiously through the deepening snow toward the far ridge, hoping to spot any tracks left by deer or rabbits before they vanished beneath fresh flurries. Their cloaks were heavy with frost, and their boots sank deeply with each step, but necessity pushed them onward, for even a small catch would ease the worries of the long winter weeks ahead. They paused occasionally to listen, hearing nothing at first but the steady hush of falling snow, until at last a faint rustle reached their ears, the sound of a creature moving through the underbrush. They exchanged a knowing glance, hope flickering briefly in their eyes, and continued silently toward the forest's edge. Elsewhere, the village healer sat near her window, grinding dried herbs with a carved stone pestle. She examined her dwindling supply of winter remedies, murmuring thoughtful words under her breath as she sorted leaves, roots, and powders into small clay jars. Her wisdom had guided the village through many winters, and though she knew the season's toll was inevitable, she worked tirelessly to ease its burdens. Her windowpane, thick with frost, captured a faint reflection of her face, lined with age yet lit with unwavering purpose. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and patient, blanketing the land in a silence so deep it seemed to absorb even the thoughts drifting gently through her mind. As the afternoon wore on, the wind picked up slightly, swirling snowflakes into small, dancing spirals that twirled playfully through the air before settling back onto the ground. The village dogs barked softly at the gusts, their noses twitching as they sniffed the shifting scents carried by the breeze. A few children, eager to explore despite the cold, ventured outside once more, their boots sinking nearly to their knees as they trudged along the path. They built small snow figures near the chapel, shaping rounded bodies and stick arms before pressing smooth stones into place for eyes and buttons. The simple joy of creation warmed them in ways the winter sun could not, and their laughter rang out gently across the village square like tiny bells chiming through the snow. Above them, the sky began to darken, not with the arrival of night but with the quiet thickening of clouds that promised another heavy snowfall before evening. The villagers watched the shifting sky with calm acceptance. They were accustomed to the unpredictable moods of winter, knowing that each change in the wind brought subtle clues about what the weather would deliver next. Some prepared by gathering additional wood or checking that shutters were properly secured. Others tended to animals one final time before dusk, brushing snow from the stable doors and ensuring the lanterns within were fueled and burning bright. As the last hours of daylight slowly approached, the medieval village seemed to settle deeper into the stillness of the season. The snow muted every footstep, softened every sound, and wrapped the world in a gentle shimmering quiet that felt almost sacred, a silence not of emptiness but of deep ancient peace. The villagers, moving through their final tasks of the day, felt the quiet settle warmly into their hearts, reminding them that winter, though harsh and unforgiving, also carried moments of profound beauty and calm. And as the sky continued to darken and the first hints of evening touched the edges of the horizon, the village prepared once more for the long, peaceful embrace of another snowy winter night. As the dimming afternoon light slowly surrendered to the deepening hues of early evening, the medieval village sank once more into a softer, quieter rhythm, as though the entire world were exhaling in long, gentle breaths beneath the growing weight of snow that continued to drift steadily from the sky. The clouds overhead thickened into a smooth, seamless blanket of gray, carrying with them the promise of a heavy nightfall, and the air grew colder still, sharpening with each passing moment until even the faintest exhalation from humans or animals rose in thick, lingering plumes that hovered before dissolving into the soft winter dusk. The snow, falling in small, persistent flakes, coated every surface with renewed tenderness. Rooftops sank under the weight of the growing layers, fences disappeared beneath rolling drifts, and the once visible paths between cottages blurred again into indistinguishable ribbons of white, leaving only the faint impressions of earlier footsteps that would soon vanish entirely beneath the next wave of snowfall. Inside the cottages, lanterns flickered to life one by one, casting warm amber circles of light against the frost-glazed windows and illuminating the interiors with a comforting glow that contrasted sharply with the cold growing outside. Families gathered near their hearths as night approached, arranging logs so the flames would last longer, stirring the last pots of stew, and laying out thick blankets to prepare for the frigid hours ahead. The children, now calmer after their play, curled up near the heat, their faces softened by the firelight as they listened to the familiar voices of their parents recounting old winter tales, stories of wanderers who stumbled upon enchanted clearings in the forest, of travelers who followed mysterious lights through the snow, of ancient guardians said to watch over the land in the coldest months of the year. These tales, meant partly to entertain and partly to teach, wove themselves into the very rhythm of the village's winter nights, becoming as much a part of the season as the snow and wind itself. Outside, the hunters who had ventured earlier toward the forest ridge returned at last, their cloaks weighed down with frost, their faces pale and wind-burned, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and acceptance. They had found little, but not nothing, and the modest catch they carried was greeted with gratitude rather than disappointment. The villagers understood that winter demanded humility. Survival was measured not in abundance but in perseverance, in the ability to endure with whatever the land chose to give. The hunters paused near the blacksmith's forge, warming their hands over the small brazier that still glowed faintly outside the door, and exchanged quiet greetings with the blacksmith as he prepared to close his workshop for the night. He wiped frost from his beard and nodded toward the thickening snowfall, remarking that the storm would grow heavier by midnight, that the winds would rise, and that the village should brace itself for a long and silent night. This prediction did not stir fear, only recognition. The villagers had learned long ago that winter nights were meant to be endured with patience and warmth, with careful tending of the fire and the comfort of one another's presence. As darkness continued to fall, the snow glow outside began to intensify, casting a soft, bluish-white luminescence across the entire village. Even without moonlight, the world appeared faintly illuminated, as if the snow itself held some quiet inner light. A few villagers stepped outside briefly to secure barn doors, check on the animals one last time, or gather wood stacked near the chapel, their footsteps muffled into near silence by the thick drifts. In the barns, animals settled down for the night, cows sinking into straw beds, horses shifting to comfortable positions, chickens tucking their heads beneath their wings as lanterns were extinguished and warmth became their shield against the cold. The stable boy lingered for a moment longer, running a hand along the muzzle of the mare he favored most, whispering gentle reassurances before drawing his cloak tighter and stepping back into the deepening night. Meanwhile, the forest beyond the village transformed under the cloak of approaching night. The tall trees, heavily burdened with snow, seemed to lean closer to one another, forming dark, whispering corridors where wind moved like a spirit through the branches. Small creatures burrowed deeper into sheltered hollows, and even the wolves, whose howls had echoed the night before, remained silent for now, choosing to conserve their strength until hunger demanded their song again. The forest was a place of profound mystery in winter, a world where silence reigned, where shadows shifted like living beings, and where time seemed to move differently, slower, as though respecting the depth of the season's stillness. Back in the village, candles were lit within the small stone chapel, creating a warm glow that spilled onto the snow just outside the door. A few villagers stepped inside for a quiet evening prayer, bowing their heads beneath the faint scent of beeswax and evergreen boughs hung earlier in the season. The priest, his voice soft but steady, murmured blessings for safety through the night, for warmth in every home, for the endurance to weather the storm. His words, simple and familiar, drifted through the chapel's air like gentle threads of comfort woven into the hearts of those gathered. As the last traces of twilight disappeared, the sky deepened into a velvety darkness broken only by the faint shimmer of snow-reflecting lantern light. One by one, the villagers retreated indoors, closing shutters tightly against the cold wind that began to rise from the west. The sound of the wind was soft at first, a barely perceptible sigh, but gradually it intensified into a low, steady whistle that threaded through the eaves and brushed against the wooden walls of the cottages. The snow, stirred by this rising wind, began to fall in slanted sheets rather than gentle drifts, and the air took on a sharper bite, cutting quickly at any exposed skin. Yet inside the cottages, warmth blossomed. Fires crackled heartily, blankets were pulled close, and families huddled together as night settled fully upon the land. Conversations grew quiet, fading eventually into silence as exhaustion claimed the weary villagers. One by one, the lanterns were extinguished, each flame flickering softly before disappearing into the darkness, leaving only the steady glow of the hearth to light the rooms. Outside, the world was swallowed completely by winter's embrace, the village now a cluster of glowing embers nestled within a vast expanse of white. And as the wind continued to rise and the snow thickened into a dense curtain that blurred even the nearest shapes, the medieval village surrendered itself peacefully to the long winter night, wrapped in silence, guarded by the steady warmth of its hearths, and watched over by the quiet, ancient presence of the land itself, as another chapter of its timeless winter unfolded in slow, serene majesty. As the winter night deepened into its quiet, all-encompassing stillness, the medieval village seemed to disappear beneath the gathering layers of snow, its rooftops blending seamlessly into the soft, undulating whiteness of the landscape until only the faint outlines of chimneys and the warm glow from a handful of hearth-lit windows distinguished human life from the silent embrace of the frozen world. The wind, now fully awakened, swept across the village with a low, mournful hum, threading through narrow lanes and whistling softly against shutters that creaked under its persistent touch. Snowflakes, sharpened by the rising gusts, swirled in wide, spiraling patterns, dancing through the air in shimmering loops before settling into the deep drifts that climbed steadily up the sides of cottages and barns. The sky above, thick with storm clouds, hid the stars completely, creating a sense of vast, velvety darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly over the sleeping land, pressing gently downward as if urging the world to rest more deeply. Inside the small, fire-lit cottages, the villagers slept with a peaceful heaviness that belonged only to those who had worked tirelessly through the long winter day and now found solace in the warmth of crackling hearths. Blankets, thick with woven wool and lined with fur, cocooned each family member as embers glowed softly in stone fireplaces, sending tiny sparks that flickered like fireflies against the soot-darkened chimneys. In one home, a grandfather stirred slightly in his sleep, shifting beneath the heavy quilt as a dream rose within him. An old memory of winter long past, when he had been young and strong, trekking through snowdrifts with his father in search of lost sheep. The memory warmed him more than the fire, painting images of a different time when the world felt bigger and his steps lighter. And though the dream faded as the fire crackled, a faint smile lingered on his face. In another cottage, a young mother awoke briefly to check on her newborn child, who slept soundly in a wooden cradle close to the hearth. The infant's breaths were soft and rhythmic, curling into tiny puffs of warm mist that melted instantly into the air. The mother reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over the child's cheek, then tucked the blanket more securely around the little body before settling again onto her own bedding with a relieved sigh. Her eyes drifted closed as the weight of the day pressed gently upon her, and in moments she, too, slipped back into quiet slumber. Elsewhere in the village, a lone watchman climbed slowly to the small wooden tower near the chapel, bracing himself against the wind as he surveyed the landscape with careful eyes. Though the storm was fierce, he felt the steady pulse of responsibility guiding him, a duty inherited from generations before him to keep the village safe through even the darkest winters. He pulled his wool cloak tightly around his shoulders, the hood shielding his face from the biting cold, and leaned over the railing to study the tree line where the forest loomed like a black silhouette against the snow-brightened ground. The wind howled softly through the trees, carrying no hint of predators tonight, no distant howl of wolves, no rustle suggesting danger. Satisfied, he nodded to himself, gripping his lantern as he descended the tower and trudged back toward the warmth of the chapel's entryway to await the next watch change. Deep within the forest, the world remained eerily still. Snow blanketed the ground so thoroughly that even the slightest movement left a soft, crisp impression before vanishing beneath the next swirl of wind-blown flakes. A great owl perched silently on a low branch, its feathers puffed against the cold, its wide eyes reflecting the faint glow of snow caught in the air. It listened intently to the distant drone of the wind, waiting for the subtle stirrings of unseen creatures beneath the snow. Farther into the woods, foxes curled into their dens, protected by layers of earth and roots, while deer huddled beneath overhanging branches that offered scant shelter but enough familiarity to ease their fear of the coming storm. The forest, ancient and patient, accepted the winter's harshness without resistance, embracing the storm as one more turn in the eternal cycle of seasons. Back in the village, the chapel bells remained silent, swaying only gently in the rising wind. Snow gathered in soft heaps along the stone foundation, climbing steadily up the walls in perfect white ridges. Inside the chapel, more candles had been lit earlier in the evening, their flames now burning low, illuminating the carved wooden pews and the simple altar adorned with evergreen boughs. Though the building stood empty at this hour, the faint scent of wax and balsam lingered in the air, mingling with the cold draft that slipped beneath the door, creating a space that felt both hushed and deeply comforting. The chapel, like the hearths in each home, served as a beacon against the night, a silent reminder of unity and hope in the face of winter's unyielding stillness. As the night deepened further, the storm reached its peak. Snow fell in thick curtains, swirling fiercely around corners and piling in great billowing drifts that nearly swallowed fences and tools left outside. The sound of the wind rose to a low roar, a deep, steady hum that swept through the village like an ancient voice murmuring across time. Yet even in this wildness, the village itself seemed peaceful, protected by its own quiet strength, embraced by the warmth of its fires, and held together by the closeness of the souls sleeping within. Slowly, as the hours passed, the storm softened. The wind settled into whispering breezes. The snowfall thinned into light, drifting flakes. A quietness settled again over the land, deeper now, as if the storm had swept the world clean and left it resting beneath a new blanket of pristine white. The cottages, half buried in snow, glowed faintly from within like lanterns scattered across an endless, silent plain. Time moved gently, unhurried, letting the village sleep undisturbed beneath winter's watchful sky. And as the darkest hour of the night approached, a time when even the fires dimmed and the world seemed suspended between sleep and waking, the medieval village lay cradled in the calm that follows the storm, wrapped in snow, wrapped in silence, wrapped in the timeless stillness of winter's deepest night. As the storm's fury faded completely into the silence of the deepest winter night, the medieval village rested beneath a vast, unbroken expanse of snow. The world softened into pale contours that glowed faintly beneath the dim sheen of clouds drifting slowly across the sky. The air had stilled so completely that not even a whisper of wind remained to disturb the delicate flakes resting upon rooftops, tree branches, and the uneven stone walls that lined the narrow lanes. Everything, every cottage, every fence, every footpath, lay tucked beneath the smooth, undisturbed blanket of white, giving the village the appearance of something almost otherworldly, a quiet island of warmth hidden beneath winter's gentle, icy embrace. The storm's passing had left behind an air so crisp and cold that each breath felt suspended in time, lingering in faint pearlescent clouds before dissolving into the softness of the night. It was the kind of cold that made every sound seem sharper, yet paradoxically muted by the deep snow, where the faint snap of a frozen branch could travel far, but the muffled footsteps of even the heaviest boot left barely a whisper in its wake. Inside the cottages, the fires had dwindled to low, glowing embers that occasionally flared with a soft crackle, sending thin fingers of light dancing along the stone hearths. Families slept deeply, worn from the long day's work and lulled by the storm's calming departure. Blankets woven from thick wool cocooned them in warmth, and the faint glow of the embers cast subtle shadows that stretched and softened across the wooden beams overhead. In one cottage, a mother instinctively pulled her child closer as the night grew colder, tucking the fur-lined blanket beneath the little one's chin before drifting once more into the comforting haze between waking and dreaming. Her breathing synchronized with the slow rhythm of the fire's soft pulses, creating a gentle harmony within the hushed room. In another home, the elderly craftsman who had spent the previous evening carving small wooden figures slept upright in his chair, his hands resting upon the smooth grain of his latest creation. A thin beam of faint silvery light, from either a lingering moon hidden behind clouds or the reflection of snow, filtered through a small window, illuminating the finished carving upon the table. The figure, a graceful depiction of a woodland deer, seemed almost alive in the stillness of the room, its shadow cast in sharp relief against the wall as if poised to leap into the snowy forest beyond. The old man breathed steadily, his dreams filled with memories of winters long past, when he had walked the snow-laden fields alongside friends now long gone. In his sleep, the lines on his face softened, and the weight of years seemed to melt away, leaving behind a quiet peace that radiated gently from his resting form. Outside, the world lay in profound stillness. The forest, which had swayed and groaned under the storm's weight, now stood motionless beneath a thick mantle of snow. The towering pines and sturdy oaks appeared sculpted from pure white marble, their branches drooping under the heavy frost, their shapes graceful and solemn in the quiet night. Beneath the canopy, small animals moved cautiously within their burrows, curling into tight circles for warmth, while others, foxes and hares, glided silently across the forest floor in search of shelter or food before dawn. Their movements left faint trails in the powdery snow, delicate lines that told brief stories before fresh flakes drifted down to conceal them once more. Even the river that wound through the forest, once clear and lively in warmer seasons, now rested beneath a thick sheet of ice that groaned softly as it settled into place, singing its ancient winter song into the depths of the night. Back in the village square, the chapel stood as a lone sentinel in the quiet landscape, its stone walls encased in frost that glittered like crushed crystal beneath the faint starlight. The wooden cross on its peak had gathered a small crown of snow, and the lantern by the chapel door had been blown out during the storm, leaving only the faintest trace of smoke drifting upward like a final sigh. Yet the chapel radiated a subtle warmth from within, where candles earlier lit had left lingering heat upon the stone floors, creating a small pocket of solace in the otherwise frigid world. The priest, asleep in his modest quarters at the back of the chapel, stirred slightly as a dream brushed against his thoughts, a vision of springtime fields, green and vibrant, where the villagers gathered joyously under the warmth of the sun. The dream was a quiet reassurance that winter, though deep and consuming now, was but one part of the cycle that would eventually yield to the next season's renewal. As the night drifted toward its coldest hour, the village dogs curled tightly against barn doors or beneath overhanging roofs, their fur thick with frost as they slept lightly, ears twitching at the occasional settling sound of snow shifting or branches bending under its weight. The chickens in their coop nestled beneath their wings, while the cows and horses in the barn breathed slow and steady, filling the air with a warm mist that hovered above their straw bedding before disappearing into the rafters. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the deep winter night began to shift. The dark clouds that had covered the sky gradually thinned, revealing at first a single star, then another, until a faint shimmer spread across the heavens like silver dust scattered upon velvet. The storm had passed completely now, and the snowfall tapered to a few delicate flakes that drifted lazily downward as if reluctant to land. The sky brightened ever so slightly, not with dawn, but with a pale glow that signals the slow turning of the night, the gentle reminder that even winter's longest, darkest hours move toward light eventually. And there, beneath the renewed clarity of the sky, the medieval village appeared timeless, silent, serene, and cradled within the protective arms of winter's deepest calm. The cottages glowed softly from within, the snow sparkled faintly across every surface, and the world felt suspended in a moment of perfect stillness, as if the very heartbeat of the land had slowed to rest. The night was not over yet, but its harshness had softened, leaving behind only peace. A peace that wrapped itself around the village like a warm memory, like a lullaby whispered across the centuries.